Ave, true to Christ. Hey everybody, this is Catholic Trash Talk, and today we are going to be talking about another ecumenical council. Now today is specifically going to be the council of, or another council I should say, because debatable and ecumenical and whatnot, but today is going to be about the Council of Constance. And like usual, I'm going to play the video that's going to give you guys an introduction, understanding. This one is going to be 32 pages long, so I am going to do what I normally do, read the introduction, and then after we get done with the video, and then I will give you guys summaries of what I've read and pause all over the place. So look forward to it. We'll get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, professors and polar bears, welcome to Clarifying
Love that
Catholicism.
tie.
You're watching part 18 of a series on the history of the ecumenical councils according to the Catholic Church. Today we are covering the Council of Constance. Much of the information was gathered from Joseph Kelly's The Ecumenical Councils of the Catholic Church, a History. So if you want an in-depth dive into these topics, make sure to pick up a copy of his book. To see the rest of our episodes, check out the playlist in the description. Without further ado, on to the show. Last episode, I talked about how Pope Clement V moved the papacy to Avignon, France, due to his ill health and fear of being perceived as unpopular in Rome. There, he appointed many cardinals, which shifted the balance of power heavily towards France. The next 6 popes, some better than others, lived in Avignon. Yet they were still expected to reign over Italian lands, the Papal States. This upset Italians, since it can be rather difficult to govern such territories from so far. Theologically speaking, keeping the papacy in France was very upsetting to people. Several kings and figures that would eventually be recognized as saints begged the popes to return to Rome. Finally, Pope Gregory XI returned in 1377 and hated the constant warfare that plagued the Papal States. He died shortly after, so he couldn't return to Avignon. Fearing that the papacy would return to Avignon if a French pope was elected, large mobs pressured the cardinals to elect an Italian pope. Their tactic worked, and the new pope took the name Urban VI. He was a rather violent man who would physically intimidate cardinals. Soon enough, the French cardinals regretted electing him, left Rome, declared him deposed, and elected a mercenary leader of the papal army as Pope Clement VII in 1378. Clement reigned in Avignon. While Europe was no stranger to multiple papal claimants, it was unusual because a monarch attempted to install their own candidate in place of a validly elected candidate. This was the first time that a substantial group of cardinals claimed that another man was the Pope. Cardinals and canon lawyers scrambled for solutions, but they eventually came across one. What if the Pope fell into heresy? Although the papacy's power had vastly expanded, was he above church teaching? If
What
not,
everybody
would
talks
determine
about,
who would
right?
be in a heretical state. The answer they came up with
What
was
if the
ecumenical
Pope
council.
decrees
Now,
something
before
heretical?
the solution could be
Uses
acted on,
ex
Clement
cathedra.
died in
What if?
1334, and the
What if?
pro-Avignon cardinals elected a successor. Likewise, when Urban died, the Roman cardinals elected their own successor. This continued for decades until nobles and monarchs pressured both parties of cardinals to meet in Pisa, Italy, for a council. At this council, the bishops declared both popes to be in states of heresy and deposed them. They elected Pope
Based.
Alexander V, and the schism was over, and the church never had to deal with any schisms again. Except not really, because both of the deposed popes refused to resign, making 3 claimants to the papacy reigning at one time. Once Alexander died, his cardinals elected a successor, John the 23rd. Fun fact, perhaps because of the confusion this whole mess caused, no pope took the name of John until 1958, when a legitimate pope took the name John the 23rd. Yet Alexander V was so popular that even the next Alexander, who did not acknowledge the legitimacy of Alexander V, decided to take the name Alexander VI. Thus, according to the Roman Catholic Church, we've had Pope Alexander IV and Pope Alexander VI, but no Pope Alexander V. Anyways, the Germans finally had him,
That's
and their king
hilarious.
called a council. He aligned himself with John the 23rd, the Pope from Pisa, promised him that everything would be okay, and called this council in Constance, a fairly neutral site. Constance attracted an immense number of attendees. The papacy was decided by representatives of various nations, so the cardinals, who were blamed for starting this whole mess in the first place, composed just 20% of the vote. The council sought to depose all 3 popes and start from scratch. When John the 23rd, who had been promised security, tried fleeing, he was captured, returned to Constance, and tried for simony, perjury, and apparently lying to his parents. He was deposed and posed no problems in the future. The Avignonian pope was more difficult to deal with, though. Eventually he was deposed, but he refused to submit to the council. He continued claiming the papacy until his death, at which point there were no further problems. The Roman Pope, Gregory, knowing he did not stand a chance against the council, wisely resigned in 1415. Since Gregory came from the Roman line of popes, his papacy is the only one of the 3 to be considered legitimate. There are a few major theological consequences from Constance. First of all, it solemnly declared that the pope must obey a council. Now, many see this as problematic because future councils would declare the authority of the Pope to be higher than that of a council in certain situations. Some scholars today think this decree solely applied to this single situation and not future ones. Others think that because there was no Bishop of Rome present at the council, its doctrinal statements are invalid. Others still think that the statement is universally valid and that the more recent teachings like papal infallibility have to take this as a check on papal authority. This is an excellent topic for another series, but needless to say, the schism finally was finished. In 1417, representatives of the nations chose an Italian bishop who took the name Martin V as the new pope. This whole ordeal presented a massive blow to the papacy's power. Constance sent a clear message that the cardinals could keep the pope in check. This movement was called conciliarism. Furthermore, a few other safeguards were installed to make sure that the situation would never repeat itself, such as the institution of frequens, or the command that popes must hold councils on a regular basis so their bishops could check in on them. The papacy was also financially broke after this ordeal, and rulers were hesitant to lend them any money, given everything that had just happened. Martin had to rebuild the papacy's authority and respect. He also had to deal with temporal affairs that had been neglected for years. Martin was ambitious, but he was severely slowed down by the frequens requirement. It was said that he hated frequens so much that he would often botch his own councils on purpose. When 7 years since the last council had passed, in 1431, he called a council at Basel. Fortunately for Martin, he died before it even started, passing along the headache of frequens to the next pope.
Crazy, crazy drama, as always. All right. No, that's pretty good. I don't need to adjust it. Okay, so the Council of Constance, which was from 1414 to 1418. And you know what time it is? Actually, it is nerd mode time. All right, introduction. This introduction given by Tanner in Decrees of Ecumenical Councils. This council was summoned by, there's, how many introductions? Okay, there's 2 introductions. First introduction. This council was summoned by John the 23rd, the Pisan Pope, with the support of Emperor Sigismund. It began on November 5th, 1414, in the Cathedral of Constance, with many bishops from all parts of Europe. Business in the council was transacted in a way that was largely new for an ecumenical council, namely, votes were not cast by individual persons, but by nations. The council from the very beginning proposed the following 3 topics. 1, to bring unity back to the church and to make an end to schism. Yeah, let's go. Which had been divided the church since 1378, and which the council held at Pisa in 1409 had not healed, but rather aggravated, when it elected Alexander V as the 3rd pope. When the Council of Constance opened, Christians owed obedience to the 3 different popes. Some owed obedience to Gregory XII of the Roman party, others to Benedict XIII of the Avignon party, and other to John the 23rd, who had been elected after the death of Alexander V. John the 23rd and Benedict the 13th were deposed by the council. Gregory XII voluntarily resigned. Then Martin V was elected pope on November 11th, 1417. He was regarded as the legitimate pontiff by the church as a whole. 2, to eradicate heresies, especially those spread by John Wycliffe in Britain and John Huss and Jerome of Prague in Bohemia. And 3, to reform the corrupt morals of the church. This, however, was only partly accomplished in the final sessions of the council. With regards to the ecumenical nature of the sessions, there is a dispute about those before the election of Martin V, and also about the significance of the force of approval, which he gave to the matters transacted by the council. The decree, notably those of sessions 3 to 5, and the decree of frequens in session 39, appear to proceed from the council's teachings. Objection has been made to them on the grounds of the primacy of the Roman pontiff. There is no doubt, however, that in enacting these decrees there was a solicitude and care to choose the true and sure way ahead in order to heal schism. and this could only be done by the authority of a council. The Acts of the Council of Constance were first published by Jerome of Croaria at Hagenu in 1500. From the Epitome of Acts, which the Council of Basel had ordered to be compiled and publicly accepted in 1442. This edition of Basil's Epitome was followed by all general elections of the council, and the rest is just references. And so this is where Protestants will hear this and they'll be like, oh, see, you have schisms in your church too. You can't judge the Protestants, but what have you done about schisms, huh? The best I've seen is maybe the Reconquista movement that Redeem Zoomer has been pushing. But I really don't see anything to end schisms. Yeah, Catholics did that before it was cool, okay? We have at least 700 years before that where we started having really bad schisms that were going on. And it only took 31 years to start getting that under control and start making a pathway so we don't have all this schisming and all this fractionalism and all this legalism. What are you doing, Prots? Huh? Nothing. No. But it's really like we cleaned up our house, and I'm saying that the Protestants need to clean up their house. So the second introduction, I have given the conventional session numbers for the Council of Constance so as to make cross-referencing with other editions easier. However, it is very misleading to do so. Let's make this a little bit bigger. That's at least better, but let's go one down. See how that's looking on the video. That's passable at least. Okay, I have given the controversial session numbers for, quote, the Council of Constance, so as to make cross-referencing with other editions easier. However, it is very misleading to do so. One should not speak of, quote, the Council of Constance, but the Councils of Constance. Gotcha. There was a Council of Bishops and others beginning November 16, 1414, which styled itself ecumenical, but when the true Pope of the day did not recognize as such, there was another council. Even if its members were the members of those of the first, which he convoked by proxy on July 4th, 1415, and did recognize as ecumenical the ratification of, quote, the Council of by Martin V, given in the footnotes, session 45, was a ratification of everything determined, quote, in a conciliar way by this present Council of Constance, end quote, i.e. the one convoked on July 4th, 1415. The intent of the words, quote, in a conciliar way, end quote, is, on my reading, to distinguish the true ecumenical council from the false one. The matter is crucial to the possibility of the Catholic doctrine of the infallibility of ecumenical councils, since the teachings of the Vatican I on papal primacy are inconsistent with those of the first non-ecumenical Council of Constance. In the particular famous Session 5, Hac Sancta, which taught conciliarianism, but not with those of the second, the ecumenical one. Crucial to my claim is the question of who the true Pope was, and when a genuinely ecumenical council came into existence. I shall quote from Philip Hughes. The footnotes here are included from the Hughes text. Quote, just 5 weeks after Baldassare Cosa so meekly accepted the council's sentence, the fathers met to receive the solemn abdication of Gregory the 13th, the 12th. He was, in fact, and to the end claimed to be in law, the canonical elected representative of the line that went back to Urban VI, the last pope to be acknowledged as pope by Catholics everywhere. The abdication was arranged and executed with care to safeguard all that Gregory claimed to be and this merit, and indeed requires much more detailed consideration than it usually receives. Gregory the 12th sent Constance as his representatives, his protector Carlo Malatesta, the Lord of Rimini, and the Dominican Cardinal John Dominici to Constance indeed, but not to General Council assembled there by the authority, and in name of John the 23rd, the envoy's commission was to the Emperor Sigismund, presiding over the various bishops and prelates whom his zeal to restore peace to the church had been brought together. To these envoys, to the Malatesta in the first place, Gregory gave authority to convoke as a general council, to convoke and not to recognize these assembled bishops and prelates, and by second bull, he empowered Malatesta to resign to the general council in his name. The emperor, the bishops, and the prelates consented and accepted the role Gregory assigned. And so, on July 4th, 1415, Sigismund, clad in royal robes, left the throne he had occupied in the previous sessions for the throne, placed before the altar. As for the president of the assembly, Gregory's two legates sat by his side, facing the bishops. The bull was read commissioning the Malatesta and the Dominici to convoke the council and to authorize whatever it should do for the restoration of unity and expiration extirpation of the schism, with Gregory's explicit condition that there should be no mention of the Baldassare Cosa, with his reminder that from his very election he had pledged himself to resign if by doing so he could truly advance the good work of unity, and his assertion that the papal dignity is truly his as the canonically elected successor of Urban VI. Malatesta then delegated his fellow envoy, the Cardinal John Dominici, to pronounce the formal operative words of convocation and assembly, but in its own way accepted to be thus convoked, authorized, and confirmed in the name, quote, of that Lord who is his own obedience is called Gregory the 12th, end quote. The council next declared that all canonical censures imposed by reason of schism were lifted, and the bull was read by which Gregory authorized Malatesta to make the act of abdication and promised to consider as a ratum gratum et firmum and forever irrevocable whatever Malatesta as his proxy should perform. The envoy asked the council whether they would prefer the resignation immediately or that it should be delayed until Peter de Luna's decision was known. The council preferred the present moment. It ratified all Gregory XII's acts, received his cardinals as cardinals, promised that his officers should keep their posts, and declared that if Gregory was barred from re-election as pope, that this was the only for the peace of the church and not for any personal unworthiness. Then the great reunification was made. Quote, reunico et cedo et resigno in hac sacrosancta synado et universia concilio sanctum Roman et universalem ecclesiam representie, quote, end quote. And the council accepted it, but again as made, quote, on the part of the Lord, who in his own obedience was called Gregory the XII, end quote. The Te Deum was sung, and a new summons drawn up calling upon Peter de Luna to yield to the council's authority. The work of Pisa was almost undone by the council, which in origin was a continuation of Pisa. It had suppressed the Pisan pope, whom Pisa, with biting words, had rejected as a schismatic and no pope. All right, so I just realized, and I'll pause for a moment. So I just realized that I had forgotten to give you guys the rundown of Lyons 2. So just to remind you guys what happened in Lyons 2, it took place, this was the council before, it took place in 1274 AD. Lyons 2 affirmed the doctrines of purgatory, hell, and final judgment. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I might have actually done that, but just setting the record straight. So now I'm going to be reading, I'm going to be pausing, I'll come back if I find anything interesting. I will give you summaries on each of the sessions, since this is the councils of Constance, not the Council of Constance. All right, so the first session is, which took place on November 16th, 1414. They're calling out John Wycliffe, and you got to realize that the Reformation movement kind of starts here, where we're calling out John Wycliffe, and we're getting these thoughts of the ultimate authority is the Bible, not the church. And so people are starting to schism and move away from the church. Jan Hus also, or the Hussite movement, also was building on top of this, but they're probably going to have rulings on this as well. But we will continue. Session 2, March 2nd, 1415. So, Session 2, John the 23rd resigns. Session 3, it's establishing the authority of the council. We shall continue in Session 4, March 30th, 1415. And Session 3 up there was March 25th, 1415. But Session 4, this is further establishing the authority of this council. Or I guess I should say councils, but we are going to move on to Session 5, which took place on April 6th, 1415. So this one was trying to make sure that not only we reestablish and reaffirm the authority and integrity of this council, of these councils, but also to create a stronger papal authority, that we actually do have to submit and we do have to follow the papal office. So when our Holy Father says something, when it's matters of which pertain to the faith, we need to obey and submit. And it looks like we have some short ones. So Session 6, April 17th of 1415, and Session 7, May 2nd of 1415. These are just doing some housekeeping and making sure that the rightful pope is being chosen, and that we are having John the 23rd doing the reunification of the papacy and the summons of John the 23rd. This one's this one's a little bit longer. So this one I do have to read because this session 8 of May 4th, 1415, has to do with the not only the condemning of John Wycliffe, but also calling him out to be a heretic. But there's 45 points of counters that they make. And, of course, this applies to Sola Scriptura, and this also applies to the reformers that want to go with the Bible as their ultimate authority and not the church. So the 45 counters that they have is one, the material substance of bread, and similarly the material substance of wine remain in the sacrament of the altar. The accidents of bread do not remain without the subject in the said sacrament. Christ is not identically and really present in the said sacrament in his own bodily persona. If a bishop or priest is in mortal sin, he does not ordain or confect or consecrate or baptize. That Christ instituted the Mass has no basis in the gospel. God ought to obey the devil. If a person is duly contrite, all exterior confessions is superfluous and useless for him. If a pope is foreknown and is damned and is evil, and therefore a limb of the devil, he does not have the authority over the faithful given to him by anyone, except perhaps by the emperor. And just in case, because I might have confused some people, these are the heresies that John Wycliffe is basically being accused of the points he's making and the errors he's falling into. That Christ is instituted the Mass has no basis in the gospel. God ought to obey the devil. If a person is duly contrite, all exterior confession is superfluous and useless for him. If a pope is foreknown as damned and is evil, and is therefore a limb of the devil, he does not have the authority over the faithful given to him by anyone, except perhaps by the emperor. Calvinist take. That's a Calvinist L right there. Nobody should be considered as Pope after Urban VI. Rather, people should live like the Greeks, under their own laws. Anarchist. Religious communist. It is against sacred scripture for ecclesiastics to have possessions. Olgi. No prelate should excommunicate anyone unless he first knows that the person has been excommunicated by God. Okay. He who does so thereby becomes a heretic and an excommunicated person. A prelate excommunicating a cleric who has appealed to the king or the king's councils is thereby a traitor to the king and the kingdom. Those who stop preaching or hearing the word of God on account of an excommunication issued by men are themselves excommunicated, as will be regarded as traitors of Christ on the day of judgment. It is lawful for any deacon or priest to preach the word of God without authorization from the apostolic see or from a Catholic bishop. Nobody is a civil lord or a prelate or bishop while he is in mortal sin. Secular lords can confiscate temporal goods from the church at their discretion then when those who possess them are sinning habitually, that is to say, sinning from habit and not particular acts. The people can correct sinful lords at their discretion. Tithes are purely alms, and parishioners can withhold them at will on account of their prelate's sins. Special prayers applied by prelates or religious to a particular person avail him or her no more than general prayers, even if other things are equal. Whoever gives alms to friars is thereby excommunicated. Whoever enters any religious order whatsoever, whether it be possessioners or the mendicants, makes himself less apt and suitable for the observance of God's commands. These are wacky. Saints who have founded religious orders have sinned in doing so. What? Members of religious orders are not members of the Christian religion. Whack. Friars are bound to obtain their food by manual work and not by begging. All Simoniacs bind themselves to pray for people in their temporal matters. The prayer of someone foreknown as damned profits nobody. I'm just going to read through these real quick. Okay. That was a lot to take in, man. So, Wycliffe has this really strange view that you being in mortal sin means that you cannot hold the office while you're in mortal sin. And that is ridiculous. That you need to be excommunicated if you're in mortal sin while doing the sacraments. So there's just like a lot of different things where it's, if you don't believe in a certain way, that's what makes you not Christian. We can see this in even reformer ideas now, and we can see a lot of the goofiness that we see in Protestantism, where it's this idea of by being in mortal sin, you can't do this, that, or the other thing, and reduces what an office can be. You can't be part of a religious order because by identifying yourself with that, or by collectivizing with that, or by joining that religious order, you are automatically sinful, that you are automatically excommunicated. These ideas that a lot of what you're doing has no avail because you're in mortal sin, and just really boils things down to a really simple way of looking at mortal sin, and just things like you're either in it or you're not. And if you're in it, everything becomes pointless, and everything becomes lesser. And I can't get behind it. But session 9 on May 13th, 1414, session 10 on May 14th, 1414, and session 11 on May 25th, 1415. We have Pope John being summoned for a second time, and an inquiry against him was decreed. John the 23rd is summoned for the third time. He is accused of contumacy and is suspended from the papacy. Pope John the 23rd is publicly charged, and 45 articles against him are produced. The session 12 on May 9th, 29th, 1415, we will get into that. I'll pause and I'll come back to it. Session 12 is trying to boil down the papacy so we can work our way towards only having one pope and not multiple different popes. Alright, session 13 on June 15th, 1415. We have the 2 points of the condemnation of communion under both kinds, recently revived among the Bohemians by Jacobek of Stryborough, and that no priest under pain of excommunication may communicate the people under the forms of both bread and wine. So there's this idea that by a priest being in mortal sin, immediately has to be excommunicated, immediately cannot perform the sacraments, and that kind of view is heretical because it's thinking that it's man's state that makes the ritual, and not that it's God's state that makes the ritual. God being the Son of God, and so Jesus being the Son of God has an authority to speak on certain matters, has an authority to assert what is true and what isn't. But his power to save others through the body and blood isn't stopped just because the priest is in mortal sin. Because, again, that would say, that would tell us that the human will can outmaneuver God and can outpower God, which is not the case. But also that we got to realize that the Eucharist, that the body and the blood is for all peoples that are baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and have given themselves to the church in admitting that the one true church is the true faith. So session 15 is the condemnation continued on John Wycliffe, but also the condemnation of Jan Hus. And Jan Hus has a lot of the same kind of views that Wycliffe has, but it's more of a theme, unlike John Wycliffe. So I'm not going to read this for time purposes, but I will have this document in the description if you want to read it. This one is specifically on page 180 and 179, or 179 to 183, to 186. So these are all thoughts that basically come down to, we are God, we sit in the throne of God, we have the ultimate deciding idea of what God is, to devalue the sacraments and devalue the authority of the church and the Pope. Sessions 16, 17, and 18, and 19, which take place on July 11th, 1415, July 15th, 1415, August 17th, 1415, September 23rd, 1415, and session 20, which took place on November 21st, 1415. So these are all short sessions. Deliberation, Emperor's immediate departure, so decrees about various matters to be decided by the council. Power is given to the judges to make decisions, and for pairs of them hear cases. That bulls of the council to be obeyed. That forgers of conciliar bulls are to be punished in the same way as forgers of apostolic letters. The letters are to be dispatched regarding the graces granted by former Pope John, except expective and exceptional graces. Ambassadors to Italy are appointed. And so this is the start of the Vatican State, that things are just finally starting to become full circle. In session 19, Jerome of Prague finally abdicates. Session 20, the Duke of Austria got put on watch. Session 21, this is condemning Jerome of Prague. Session 22 through session 36. All right. Session 22, October 15th, 1416. This is the King of Aragon, and slowly working towards ousting Benedict the 13th. Session 23 on November 5th, 1416. This is the case against Peter de Luna. Session 24, November 28th, 1416 is the actual citation against Peter de Luna. And a second calling of Benedict the 13th. Session 25 on December 14th. The Spanish Count of Foy are united with the council. Session 26 on December 24th, 1416. The King of Nerevar was united with the council. Session 27th on February 20th, 1417. Dealing with disputes. Session 28th, March 3rd, 14th to 17th. Dispute is concluded. Duke of Austria gets condemned. Based. Session 29, March 8th, 1417. Peter de Luna is finally accused of contumacy. Process against Peter de Luna continues in Session 30th. Session 30 on March 10th, 1417. 31, March 31, 1st, 1417. We have the warning against Philip, Count of Virtus. Session 32, April 1st, 1417. Peter de Luna is again accused of contumacy, and they start an inquiry. Session 33 of May 12th, 1417. Peter de Luna has the process against him and is continued to be deemed contumacious. Session 34, June 5th, 1417. The condemnation of Peter de Luna is almost complete. Session 35, and June 18th, 1417. The envoys of King of Castile are united with the council in accordance with the terms of the Treaty of Narbonne. So there's some unity going on. And finally, Session 36, July 22nd, 1417. And Peter de Luna is cited to hear the council sentence. Session 37th, July 26th, 1417. This is the definitive sentence of Peter de Luna. Peter de Luna got a huge spotlight in these councils of just constantly getting in trouble. Session 38, July 28th. Nobody made a vote on the disappearance of having a brain fart here. Continuing on the dispute train, Session 39, October 9th, 1417, we have the General Councils. This is the decorum on the General Councils and the guarding of future schisms. Okay. I will pause and I will be right back. Session 39 was more about maintaining what property goes where, spoils of war, general how we conduct ourselves. And now we'll move on to Session 40, on October 30th, 1417. So Session 40 was reaffirming the election, the authority of the Pope, and how to properly continue this election. Session 41 on November 8th, 1417. This was the conclave. That's how we got Martin V. Session 42 on December 28th, 1417. This was the approved Baldessare Cosa. Session 43 on March 23rd, 1418. Certain statuses promulgated on the reform of the church. I'm going to pause and I'll be right back. So the rest were pretty similar, so I avoided them. But session 45, we have April 22nd, 1418. This is the sentence dissolving the council and the granting of indulgences. So I'm going to specifically read this one. Martin, etc. We dissolve the council as the sacred council itself requires for reasons that are certain, reasonable, and just. We give permission with the council's approval to each and every person at the council to return home. Furthermore, on the authority of the Almighty God, of His blessed apostles, Peter and Paul, and on our authority, we grant each and every person who has taken part in this sacred council and its business a full absolution of all his sins once in his life, provided he takes advantage of the absolution in correct form within 2 months of hearing about this. We grant the same hour of death. This is to be understood as applying to both lords and members of the household, provided that they fast on each Friday from the day they come to know of this indulgence. In the case of those who seek the absolution for while they are alive, and for another year, in the case of those who seek it for the hour of death, unless they are legitimately prevented from doing so, in which case they should perform the other pious works. After the second year, they ought to fast on Fridays until the end of their lives, or to perform other pious works. Let therefore, if anyone, however, given and enacted at Constance in place of this public session. So, not only did they dissolve the council finally on April 22nd, 1418, they did finally make the case for we can do indulgences for other people, which is really important because if you believe, like what Ryan from needgod.net believes, by believing in baptism is believing in a work that you're doing, and therefore you're automatically boasting, then you can't pray over people. You can't do what would be considered an indulgence in making a sacrifice for other people, in praying for other people, and requesting things for other people. Because of the other thing that we can run into with the once save, always save ideology of, well, Jesus did the one-time sacrifice for all, so there is no sin that can separate you. So you don't actually need to pray for others. You just need to pray to God, which is a offensive heresy, because we are called to be a communal nation and pray for each other and to work with each other. That's it. Next is going to be the Council of Basel. So let us actually recap, because I seem to be forgetting a lot of those. So remember that the councils of Constance between 1414 AD and 1418 AD, the major decisions that was made was ending the Great Western Schism, affirming the authority and necessity of the Church and Pope, affirming the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, affirming that sacraments administered by clerics in a state of mortal sin are actually valid, and the heresies that were addressed was Donatism, the teachings of John Wycliffe, the teachings of Jan Hus, and essentially the teachings in general of early reformer Protestantism. But that is everything, guys. Feel free to bully me in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong. I look forward to hearing from you guys. I hope you have a blessed day. Bye-bye.